Hello! Welcome back to Bookshelves. My name's Shelby. This is a cozy little corner on the internet where we talk about all things reading, writing, and otherwise bookish. And I love a listicle, particularly a book recommendations listicle. And in honor of February here in the United States being Black History Month, I thought I would bring you a snappy book recommendations listicle style video that covers some of my favorite Black heroines in fiction. I know how much representation can matter, and I think that these books provide us like a really great spectrum of stories with Black heroines at their center across experience. Some of these stories are fiction very much grounded in our real world, histories or perhaps alternative histories that engage with the real lived experience of Black Americans. And some of these do us that great service of leveraging fiction and imagination to imagine a world where racism is not the great scourge on the world and the plot of the book. Much like it is equally important to have queer stories that tell us about the real struggles of the queer community in our world, and that imagine a world where homophobia just isn't a problem and we get to see queer love across all kinds of beautiful, wonderfully imagined, rich other worlds are important. I think that is similarly important when we look at stories about Black female characters. And so I have a little range for us today, and I hope you will find something in this list that you want to pick up and a character who you'll fall in love with. Okay, let's dive into it. The first book that has to make this list is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, which is an absolutely phenomenal piece of fiction across all kinds of representation. And if you love high epic fantasy, this is a book that you absolutely have to read. I believe over the course of this book we get 4 major points of view, but one of those is from Ede, who is a fire mage from a secret society living as a spy amongst the Queen's royal court. And she kind of has this like understanding of the history of one of this world's most important moments and its sort of true nature, whereas many of the other people in this world have developed religious understandings of that incident that sort of mess with the facts a little bit, sort of warp perceptions of power. And of course, there's a little nugget of truth in everybody's version of that history. Ede is a total badass, frankly. She's a well-trained warrior. She's a wielder of fire magic, and she is in love with the Queen of Innis, who absolutely loves her too. And so not only do we get to see her as an incredibly powerful warrior woman lead who helps defend this world against sort of its ultimate evil, we also get to see a beautiful love story with her at the center. Ede is one of my favorite characters in fiction, as is her relationship with Queen Sabran. I love the world that is so artfully crafted by Samantha Shannon in this book. And if you don't mind, like 800 pages of text, this is an absolutely excellent place to start when searching for your new favorite Black heroine. Turning away from the world of high fantasy and towards instead dystopian fiction, I would like to recommend one of 2 Octavia Butler books for this list, and that is Parable of the Sower. This book will ruin your life, okay? I was like devastated reading this series. It has a sequel called Parable of the Talents. In fact, in interviews, Octavia Butler said that she intended this to be a longer series, but writing it literally made her so sad she had to stop. But that being said, it's phenomenal and considered a modern classic for a reason. This book follows a near future. In fact, it's a future that we just passed in real time because this book was published, I think, in the 80s and was set in the 2020s. In the United States, that has sort of fallen into disrepair. There is political upheaval because of a combination of climate crises, social crises related to drugs and economic distress, and the sort of scattered remains of society are all kind of living in these closed off communities, fighting for their own, and really living in like a sort of post-apocalyptic future. There hasn't been perhaps one incident of apocalypse that we imagine, but perhaps just like such a total degradation of society as we know it, that everyone lives in constant fear and in constant scarcity. And Lauren Alamina, our main character in this book, lives in one of these communities. Her father is a preacher, and at the start of the book, she is sort of forced out of her community and into the dangerous, unprotected, unwalled rest of the world. And she goes on a journey in search of safety, along the way, kind of connecting with different people. And the primary part of her story is actually one of like creating a religion, which is wild. But she believes very strongly that there is perhaps no God unless that God is change itself. Sort of the value of change, our will to change, that is sort of what is at the heart of life, by her understanding. And so as she kind of goes on this great journey, she brings that religious system with her and kind of becomes a religious leader onto herself. There's also a really interesting bit of mild kind of fantasy in this story, in that Lauren is also a hyper empath. Is that what they're called? Yes, a hyper empath, which means that when she bears witness to someone else's suffering, she like physically experiences that as well. And in such a cutthroat world, that kind of vulnerability is a huge risk. And so that's sort of the plot of the story, right? Those are the major beats, the major things at play. But these books are so much more than that. And they are perhaps the eeriest set of books I have ever read from a like dystopian fiction predictions perspective. Octavia Butler in this series, written in the 80s, wrote about a president of the United States that was terrible, who campaigned on the slogan, "Make America Great Again." She predicted that climate crises and social crises would tear at the threads and foundation of society in America. It's uncomfortable, okay? But it's phenomenal, and I could not look away reading these books, and I highly recommend them. We get to see Lauren through a lot of her life in this series, and she is another character who is absolutely a contender for like icon in my mind. The only thing I will flag about this book, I should have said at the top, generally speaking, I read a lot of books that engage with themes around gender-based violence, and because of that, I just sort of blanket recommend checking out content warnings for all of the books that I recommend on this channel, because there's a very high proportion of them that engage with some really painful topics that might not be safe or comfortable for you to engage with at any given moment. And I want you always to go into the books I recommend knowing that. Something that isn't quite as explicitly triggering for some folks, but that I do want to flag about this book because it's kind of uncomfortable, is there's like a massive age gap romance in these books that I could have done without, like tenfold. So if that's something that's like particularly uncomfortable or particularly painful for you, just know that that is a part of these books that isn't likely to show up in like content warnings, but is icky in my opinion. Next on this list, frankly, no list like this would be complete without Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I love these books so much. This is YA fantasy at its best. This book follows a young girl named Bree who lives in North Carolina, I believe, and is going to a sort of pre-college program for very smart upper-level high school students. And at that time, she is also grieving the loss of her mother, who died in a car accident under somewhat suspicious circumstances from her perspective. And we follow Bree as she begins to kind of pull at the threads of that mystery around her mother's death, because she starts to discover magic on campus. In particular, that there are monsters and there are like magical warriors that fight the monsters, and they are actually all part of a secret society of people who believe they are the reincarnated souls of the Knights of the Round Table and of King Arthur himself. So not only is this a YA fantasy with like delightful kick your feet young romance, high action, and really compelling social themes that we'll get to in a second, this is also a King Arthur mythology retelling. So the series really has it all, and it is so unputdownable. I've not picked up a book that is quite so addictive in a long time. The magic in the world that Brie uncovers is kind of twofold. There is this world of Arthurian magic, sort of classic swords and sorcery, if you will. And then she starts to meet other people on campus and learn about other practices of magic. Things like rootcraft, which are tied to her family's like African descent and ancestry. Things that are tied to our country's very painful history of enslavement. And we see those worlds collide in lots of ways that are very compelling, very emotional, and kind of rock the world of the people around her while she kind of stands at the intersection of these identities. And so this book is amazing for so many reasons. I think it's particularly a compelling story for any like young people in your life who you really want to hand like your next favorite Black heroine, to really give them somebody to look up to model, and to adore as I do. And I can't say enough good things about this series. There are 3 out now, and I believe it's expected to be at least a 5-book series, so there's more to come. I also have to say, as somebody who was not raised in the South, I'm very grateful to Tracy Dion for introducing me to a wide range of beloved Southern franchised fast food restaurants. Like, I read this book and I was like, I have to go to Waffle House now. I have to go to Bojangles now. What is a Bojangle? And I had family move to the South not long after I read this book. So it was very fun to be like, she's raving about the food in here, and then get to go and enjoy a little bit of Southern food as well. So truly, everything about this book is a delight, and I highly recommend. This next book is perhaps the most underrated book on my list, and that is Monsters We Defy by Leslie Penelope. I love this book. It is so crafty and compelling, and I just think more people should be talking about it. So, this book follows a woman named Clara in 1920s Washington, D.C. And much like other books on this list, it's sort of like an alternative magical version of history. So we're in the Prohibition era. We're in an era where Jim Crow laws are still active in America, and there's a great deal of segregation in many cities across the country. And Clara is looking around her beloved community and finding more and more people going missing, and no one really being willing to look for them. In this world, there is sort of like a system of trading magic with the spirit world that happens with many people. You can basically ask for a boon or a gift, but in return, you pay a serious price. You take on some kind of curse, or have to sacrifice some part of yourself. And so we follow Clara, who has a gift, and of course, with it, a curse. And as she really goes looking for answers about what is happening in her community. A mystery that unravels and ends in a heist story, which is just about the most fun thing possible. I am the biggest sucker for heist books. If you did not know that about me, my favorite books are like all heist stories. So not only do we have like a really fun creative magic system and a layer of like social plot that is a very real part of this period of time in American history, but we also have a fantasy heist story unraveling, which means that she has to, get the gang together. And we get to be introduced to all these other characters who have similarly made trades, and really watch how they navigate the world with those trades. in mind. So there are just such interesting characters in this story. There is such a like heart and love of community in this story. And there's a really, again, like compulsive plot that makes you feel like you cannot put the book down. This was so much fun, and I'm dying for more people to read it so I can talk to them about it. I love Clara, and I think you would too. Another book on my list that I don't have physically, but that I'm sure is living somewhere around me, is The Conductors. This is a book I finished quite recently and has been on my reading list for years. I'm so glad I picked it up. The book has two timelines. The primary contemporary timeline is a murder mystery following our main character Hetty and her husband, who investigate these days crimes against their community, mysterious magical crimes. But once upon a time, they were conductors on the Underground Railroad. And so we kind of see them navigating this current timeline, which is a murder mystery in post-Civil War Philadelphia where they live. But we also keep getting all of these glimpses at their past. A past where enslaved folks who had magic wore collars that prevented them from using their magic. A past where she broke free of that and then used her magic in order to save other people and help ferry them to freedom. This story is so wonderfully crafted. There's really like no room to be bored in this book because there are so many different elements that we're following at once. There's this really interesting set of magic systems. Here again, we have kind of dueling magic almost, where most of the people in the Black American community use celestial magic, which of course is such a wonderful nod to the conductors in the real Underground Railroad who used the stars as their guide. And in this world, you can draw constellations and then summon the associated magic with them, kind of like you would wards and hexes, any kind of like drawing-based magic. And then largely the white Americans use sorcery, and like wands are very closely associated with sorcery as well. So we've got this really interesting dueling magic system. We have a very heartfelt search for our main character's sister, from whom she was separated when she found her way to freedom. We have a murder mystery that really engages with all of the social tensions that followed the Civil War in the US. This is like the Reconstruction period, right before we kind of fall back into Jim Crow. And there's just so many parts of that history that we don't talk about in schools, at least not in the small, rural, northern public schools that I went to as a child. And so I just found that there were so many little moments in this book that were really powerful. And also there were so many different elements of tension that kind of wove into the murder mystery and kind of made you suspect different people at different moments in the story. There's also a romance that's quite unexpected in this story between Hetty and her husband. And you go, her husband? Duh. They're married. But it kind of turns out that their marriage is one of convenience. And so even though we are in a much more modern timeline than like a Regency romance would be, we're kind of following a marriage of convenience story that turns into like real love. And that is also just very like kind of giddy and heartwarming and a whole lot of fun. Hetty is another like badass character. In the first few pages of the book, she is taking people out and it is so cool to see. But she also is really grappling with like what it means to be a good friend and to be a good sister. There's so many parts of Hetty that I love. And I think you would love her too. Next on the list is my other Octavia Butler recommendation, and that is Kindred. I love Kindred so much. This is another devastating book, frankly, and another one that makes us take a really close, painful look at this country's history with slavery with a modern eye at the time, which we then get to analyze again from like the current time, which is more modern than the time it was written. So this book, again, I think was written in like the 80s. And it follows Donna, who lives in 1970s San Francisco, I believe. She's a Black reporter, if I'm not mistaken. She's like moving into a new house, and she like takes a wrong step and gets pulled into the past. So this is sci-fi, technically, but it's mostly historical fiction. She gets sucked into the antebellum South and kind of finds herself on plantation land as a Black woman who now suddenly has to take care of herself and survive with no idea how she got here and no idea how to get home. And upon her arrival, there is a child drowning who she saves. And throughout the book, Donna is pulled back and forth in time into this plantation in the South, and we start to like unravel the mystery of what tethers her to this place in time. And because of course she's a woman from the 1970s, she is experiencing the threat and the sometimes acts of enslavement upon her person, but with the perspective of someone from the 1970s who was like, excuse you, we've done civil rights, right? Like, that is so interesting and so powerful, having that layered perspective. And then of course, you know, if you picked this up tomorrow, it was 2026. So some of the commentary in here, you know, benefits from an even more modern perspective. So I just think this is a phenomenal, devastating book. The amount of grit and resilience and creativity and compassion that Donna has to leverage to survive in this book are unmatched. It's such a phenomenal read, and Donna is an excellent role model for anyone who's really in need of some grit, because she is facing like some of the ultimate horrors of our world, but she does it with an amount of grace and persistence that is very hard to imagine actually conjuring in the moment. So, top-notch stuff. Kindred is another classic for a reason, and I highly recommend spending some more time with Donna. Okay, last but not least on this list is a little romance for you. I would be remiss if I did not give you a proper, full-fledged romance recommendation in this listicle. And for that, I'm going to recommend, as you've heard from me before, The Davenports by Crystal Marquis. Crystal is one of my favorite romance writers. There are 2 books out in this series. I think there are more to come, and I am so grateful for them because these books are so much fun. And frankly, I think they are like a model of what romance novels should be. One of the things I love about The Davenports is that this is not a recommendation with one phenomenal Black heroine. It's actually a recommendation with 4 phenomenal heroines. That is because this book follows 4 different women, 2 sisters from the Davenport family, a very well-to-do family in 1910s Chicago. It also follows their longtime family friend and their maid, who is also a very good friend. Each girl in these books gets their own love story and their own pursuit of their passions. It is a twisting and turning story. It does not have a tidy ending, and everybody is so passionate in their own right. There's so much to admire about these girls, the way they push the boundaries of what society says they can do, what their families encourage them to do. And this is actually, I think, the only story on this list that does not include a fantasy element. This is pure historical fiction. So we are grounded in, again, a real time in Chicago history when there were Black families that were really experiencing high degrees of wealth for the first time, kind of navigating a very complicated social dynamic at the time, and being so closely tied still to the very painful and recent history of slavery in America. So the father of the Davenport family is an escaped enslaved man himself, who then went on to build an incredibly successful carriage company. His children are now pushing him to make it a motor vehicle company. Look out. And it's all based on real history. This is based on an actual family. I believe they were based in Ohio, not Chicago. But it's another great place to learn about what the Black experience in America in the early 1900s was like. and to see it depicted in a way we don't often see it, right? Because we are following predominantly women of extreme wealth. Their maid, Amy Rose, has a slightly different story. Hers is an immigrant story. Hers is the story of starting a small business and falling in love across social class. But it's a great place to look for the sort of untold histories of Black women in America. I learned a lot here again from this story that I certainly wasn't introduced to in school. Anyway, I say all of that to say that there are lots of really interesting and important and serious themes in this book, but it is a romance, and I want to reiterate that, like, this is a very good time. You will kick your feet. You will have butterflies in your tummy. You will root for these girls so much. There are such a great cast of female leads in this book to love, and I hope you pick it up and find who resonates most with you. Okay, that's the end. A snappy little listicle indeed. I hope that something in this video piqued your interest and that you will pick something up from this list in February. If you have read any of these books, I would love to know what you thought about it. And of course, if you've read any other books with absolutely top-notch Black heroines, I would love for you to drop those in the comments down below so that I can add them to my own reading list this February and, as the year progresses. I hope to see you around here again sometime soon. You can subscribe to stay up to date on all the latest videos I make about books and writing and other such things. In the meantime, I hope you find a fabulous book to read, and I will see you all soon. Bye.